Welcome back. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a like. Enjoy the video. When Elon Musk stopped his Cybertruck for a girl on a quiet Los Angeles street, no one could have anticipated it would ignite a movement. What followed didn't merely alter her life, it reverberated throughout the world. The streets of Los Angeles were unusually still that evening. A soft breeze carried the faint murmur of distant traffic as Elon Musk drove his sleek Cybertruck down Sunset Boulevard. The vehicle's glossy exterior reflected the city lights, but his thoughts were far from the road. He was lost in contemplation, pondering the complexities of his latest projects. That's when he spotted her sitting on the cold concrete near the corner of a dimly lit convenience store. It was a young girl no older than 10. Her small frame seemed almost engulfed by the oversized hoodie she wore, and her legs were tucked beneath her in a futile effort to stay warm. In her hands, a piece of cardboard bore a hastily written message: "Hungry and need help." Elon slowed down, his eyes fixed on her. Something about her resonated deeply, a blend of vulnerability and quiet resolve that made it impossible to turn away. Without a second thought, he pulled over, the Cybertruck's tires crunching against the gravel by the curb. Passersby halted in their tracks, unsure how to interpret the billionaire stepping out of his futuristic vehicle to approach a homeless child. "Hello there," Elon said gently, crouching to meet her at eye level. She looked up, startled, clutching the sign tighter. Her large, expressive eyes searched his face, wary yet curious. "I'm Elon. What's your name?" he asked, his voice warm but direct. She hesitated before responding, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sophie." In that brief exchange, time seemed to stand still. People gathered at a distance, murmuring and taking out their phones to capture the moment. But Elon's focus remained entirely on Sophie. "Are you out here all alone?" he asked, his tone more concerned than intrusive. She nodded slightly, her eyes darting between him and the growing crowd. Elon noticed the fatigue etched into her face, and the way her fingers trembled, not from fear but from the cold. Without another word, he took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "Let's talk," he said, his voice calm yet compassionate. "I want to hear your story." As Sophie looked at him, a flicker of hope ignited in her eyes, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Sophie hesitated for a moment, clutching the edges of the oversized jacket as if it were a shield. The fabric smelled faintly of musk and leather, a stark contrast to the damp air surrounding her. Elon lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the cold ground, his Cybertruck looming behind him like a silent protector. His unexpected gesture seemed to ease her initial hesitation. "I'm not here to disturb you," he said softly, "but if there's anything I can do, I want to help." Her eyes flicked to the gathering crowd. Their eyes. Strangers were holding up their phones, recording the scene as if it were the latest episode of a reality show. Sophie murmured, barely audible, "Elon." Elon turned his head slightly toward the onlookers, and then back to her. "Don't worry about them," he reassured her. "Right now, it's just you and me." His calm tone seemed to cut through the noise, anchoring her. Sophie examined his face, searching for any hint of mockery or pity. Instead, she found something she didn't expect: genuine curiosity. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone was truly looking at her. "What happened, Sophie?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "How did you end up here?" The question lingered in the air for a moment, heavier than the cold night itself. Sophie swallowed hard, her throat dry and voice shaky. "My mom, she got sick. We couldn't afford rent after that. I tried to keep going to school, but..." Her voice trailed off as she looked down, tears welling in her eyes. "I couldn't, for Bwin." Elon's expression softened. He didn't push her to continue, allowing her to take her time. After a moment, she added, "She passed a few months ago. It's just me now." The weight of her words hit Elon like a punch to the gut. He couldn't fathom the strength that must have taken for someone so young to survive on her own. His eyes flicked to her hands, raw and chapped from the cold, and the thin shoes barely holding together on her feet. "I'm so sorry, Sophie," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity that surprised even him. "That's a lot for anyone to endure, let alone a child." She shrugged, as if trying to dismiss the gravity of her situation. "I'm used to it," she replied, though her tone revealed the cracks in her facade. "But sometimes it's hard to keep going." Elon glanced back at the Cybertruck, its futuristic design appearing almost out of place in this moment of raw humanity. Then he made a decision, one that was instinctive and unplanned. "Come with me," he said suddenly, standing up and extending a hand. "I want to show you something." Sophie froze, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "Why?" she asked, her voice laced with skepticism. "Because I think you're stronger than you realize," he said simply, "and maybe, just maybe, you deserve a break." Sophie hesitated before taking Elon's outstretched hand. The crowd murmured around them, but in that moment, it felt as though the world narrowed to just the two of them. Slowly, she rose to her feet, still clutching the edges of his jacket. She followed him to the passenger side of the Cybertruck, her footsteps tentative, as if stepping into an entirely new reality. Inside the truck, warmth enveloped her instantly, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. Her hands instinctively reached for the heated vents. Elon watched her for a moment, noting how her small movements spoke volumes. Careful, cautious, as if every comfort was a delicate gift she wasn't accustomed to receiving. "You okay?" he asked, his tone light but sincere. Sophie nodded, though her eyes darted around the vehicle, taking in its futuristic interior. "I've never been in a car like this," she admitted, her voice tinged with awe. "It's strange." Elon chuckled. "It's definitely not your typical ride," he said, starting the engine. "But don't worry, it's just a truck, same as any other." Sophie's face relaxed slightly, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. For a moment, it felt as though the weight of her circumstances had lifted, if only just a little. As they drove, Elon began to ask more about her life. "You mentioned your mom earlier." "Tell me about her," he said, careful not to press too hard. Sophie's gaze fell to her lap, her fingers fidgeting with the frayed edges of her hoodie. "She was the best," she said quietly. "She worked 2 jobs most of the time, waitressing during the day and cleaning offices at night. She always said things would get better, that we'd find a way out of the mess." She paused, her voice catching. "But then she got sick. At first, it was just a cough, but it didn't go away. By the time we got her to a doctor, they said it was too late." Her words poured out in a rush, as if saying them quickly might lessen the pain. Elon remained silent, letting her speak, his hands gripping the wheel a little tighter, his mind racing. "When she died, everything just fell apart," Sophie continued, her voice quivering. "The landlord kicked us out because we couldn't pay rent. I stayed with a friend for a while, but her parents said I couldn't anymore, so I came here. It's not great, but at least no one tells me to leave." Elon's chest tightened at her words. He had built companies, solved engineering puzzles, and launched rockets into space as doublies. But nothing in his vast experience had prepared him for the stark reality of this child's life. The streets had hardened her, but beneath it all she was still just a kid who'd been dealt an unimaginably cruel hand. "What about school?" he asked, his voice softer now. "I liked school," Sophie said, her face lighting up for a brief moment. "Math was my favorite, and I used to dream about being an engineer. But it's hard to think about dreams when you're just trying to stay warm at night." Her words lingered in the air, a poignant reminder of the disparity between those who had everything and those who had almost nothing. Elon glanced at her, his mind working furiously. He couldn't undo what had happened to her, but maybe, just maybe, he could help change what came next. The Cybertruck glided to a stop at a small cafe just outside downtown Los Angeles. The place wasn't flashy, just a quiet spot where the aroma of coffee and fresh bread wafted through the air. Elon parked the truck and turned to Sophie. "Let's grab a bite to eat. You must be hungry." Sophie blinked at him, her lips parting as if to protest. But before she could say anything, Elon added, "Don't worry about anything, just come inside with me." Reluctantly, she nodded and followed him out of the truck. The warmth of the cafe enveloped her as they stepped inside. She pulled the oversized jacket closer around her, as if fearful someone might take it away. Elon waved to the cashier, who immediately recognized him, her expression flickering between awe and curiosity. "Whatever she wants," he said, gesturing to Sophie. The cashier smiled gently. "What would you like, sweetheart?" Sophie hesitated, her eyes scanning the menu above the counter. It was evident she wasn't accustomed to being asked what she wanted. Just a sandwich," she said timidly. Elon leaned closer and whispered, "Get the biggest one, trust me." That coaxed a small laugh out of her, and for the first time, she seemed to relax. She chose a turkey and avocado sandwich, and Elon added hot chocolate and a slice of pie to the order. They took a seat by the window where the hum of the city was just a distant murmur. As Sophie took her first bite, Elon observed her closely. It wasn't merely hunger she was feeding. It was the kind of comfort she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Good?" he asked, smiling. She nodded, her mouth full, and for a moment she resembled any other kid enjoying a treat, but the moment didn't last long. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty as if she was waiting for something to go wrong. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly, setting her sandwich down. Her voice was cautious, guarded. "You don't even know me." Elon leaned back in his chair, his expression contemplative. "You're right, I don't," he said. "But I know this. No child should have to grow up the way you've been forced to. I can't change what's already happened to you, Sophie, but perhaps I can help alter what comes next." She frowned, as if struggling to accept his words. "People say things like that all the time," she muttered. "But they don't mean it. They just feel sorry for me." Elon leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I don't feel sorry for you," he said firmly. "I feel inspired by you. You've been through so much, and yet you're still here. That takes courage." Sophie's frown softened into something unreadable. But there was a flicker of hope in her eyes, a small spark that hadn't been there before. "So what now?" she asked cautiously. Elon smiled, his eyes alight, with an idea that had been forming since the moment he'd stopped the truck. "Now we're going to figure out how to get you off the streets. And not just you," he added, his voice gaining momentum, "but many others who've been forgotten." Sophie tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. "How?" Elon leaned closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "With a little bit of innovation and a whole lot of heart." The following morning, the internet awoke to an unexpected story. Elon Musk had been spotted talking to a homeless girl in Los Angeles. Photos and short videos captured by onlookers the previous night flooded social media, showing Elon sitting cross-legged on the ground beside Sophie, his jacket draped over her shoulders. Initially, the reactions were mixed. Some dismissed it as a publicity stunt, claiming it was merely a billionaire trying to enhance his image. But as more details emerged, accounts from the cafe staff, passers-by, and even a security camera video showing Elon walking Sophie back to his Cybertruck, the tone began to shift. Skepticism gave way to fascination, then admiration. News outlets picked up the story, plastering headlines like, "Elon Musk takes time for homeless girl, a billionaire's unlikely encounter," and "Musk promises change after heartfelt talk with young girl on the streets." Elon, for his part, remained unusually silent. There were no tweets, no official statements, no interviews. But that didn't stop people from speculating. Who was the girl? What did they discuss? And most importantly, what was Elon planning to do next? A week later, the answer came in a rare press conference, streamed live on multiple platforms. Elon stood at the Tesla headquarters, a photo of Sophie prominently displayed on a screen behind him. Dressed in a simple black jacket and jeans, he appeared less like a tech mogul and more like someone deeply committed to a cause. "I met someone last week who reminded me what it means to dream, even in the hardest of circumstances," he began, his voice steady yet carrying an unusual weight. "Her name is Sophie, and she's one of the strongest individuals I've ever met. She's faced challenges most of us can't even imagine, and yet she's still fighting." That kind of resilience deserves more than just admiration. It deserves action. The room was silent, every reporter hanging on his words. "That's why I'm announcing a new initiative," Elon continued. "We're calling it the Haven Project. Using Tesla and SpaceX technologies, we're developing sustainable mobile housing units designed specifically for individuals experiencing homelessness. These units will provide not just shelter but also energy, connectivity, and resources to help people get back on their feet." The announcement sent shockwaves around the world. Social media exploded with hashtags like Hatch the Haven Project and How Are Sophie's Hope. Support poured in from celebrities, activists, and everyday citizens alike. But there were critics too. Those who questioned the feasibility of the project or accused Elon of exploiting Sophie's story for personal gain. Through it all, Sophie remained the heart of the narrative, her image wrapped in Elon's jacket, Her small frame sitting across from him at the cafe became a symbol of hope and possibility. People from all walks of life found themselves rooting for her, inspired by the notion that even one encounter could spark monumental change. Elon wasted no time turning his words into action. Within weeks, the first prototype of a mobile housing unit was unveiled, a sleek, compact pod that could be transported anywhere, powered entirely by solar energy. The unit featured insulated walls, a fold-out bed, a small kitchenette, and even a Wi-Fi hotspot. It wasn't just a shelter. It was a lifeline crafted with dignity in mind. The launch event took place in Los Angeles, not far from where Elon first met Sophie. She stood beside him, dressed in a clean new outfit that highlighted how much had changed in just a few weeks. Her hair was neatly combed, and for the first time, there was a flicker of confidence in her eyes. "These pods are a start," Elon said to the crowd of reporters, volunteers, and city officials. But this isn't just about technology. It's about restoring hope. And Sophie here, she's the reason this all began. The audience erupted into applause as cameras focused on Sophie, who offered a shy smile. It was a moment of triumph, but it was also deeply personal. She wasn't just a symbol of the project's success. She was proof that change was achievable. The first 10 units were deployed in Los Angeles, placed strategically in areas where homelessness was most prevalent. Elon partnered with local organizations to provide additional support, including job training, mental health services, and education programs. Sophie became an ambassador for the project, speaking to other kids who had found themselves in similar situations. Her story resonated with them in a way no adult could replicate. Media coverage of the Haven Project reached every corner of the globe. Stories of lives being transformed began pouring in. A single mother reuniting with her children, a young artist rediscovering his passion, an elderly veteran finding solace after years on the streets. Each story added momentum to the initiative, turning skeptics into believers. But the project wasn't without challenges. Critics questioned its scalability and sustainability. Could these pods genuinely address the systemic issues behind homelessness? Elon faced tough questions during interviews, but his responses were consistently pragmatic. "This isn't the solution to every problem," he admitted during a televised Q&A, "but it's a start. And sometimes, that's all people need. A start." Sophie's life had taken a dramatic turn as well. She moved into one of the first pods, calling it her tiny miracle. With Elon's encouragement, she returned to school, this time with the stability she needed to focus on her studies. Her love for math reignited, and she began dreaming of becoming an engineer again. This time, not as a distant fantasy, but as a tangible goal. As months passed, Sophie's transformation became a beacon for others. Her courage inspired donations from unexpected sources, including rival tech CEOs, musicians, and everyday people moved by her story. The Haven Project expanded to other cities, adapting to the unique needs of each community. During a follow-up interview, Sophie was asked what she thought of Elon's role in her life. She paused, considering her answer thoughtfully. "He didn't just help me," she said finally. "He showed me that I mattered, and sometimes that's all it takes to change everything." Here on Karma's Twists, we share the most impactful stories of karma and justice that the world needs to see. Don't miss a single moment of good triumphing over evil. Join our community and subscribe. Be part of the movement that believes justice always wins.